The following podcast probably contains bad language, adult themes, and massive spoilers. Basically, all the fun stuff. If that isn't for you, maybe give this a miss. You have been warned. Abandon all trope, all ye who enter.
Nice.
In a world where tropes run rampant, two men stand tall. Well, one not so tall. They are ready. They are steadfast. They are making it up as they go along. They are the Trope Stormers.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Trope Stormers. Episode 4 in the lineup with me, Chris Jeeves.
And me, Jim Carlberg.
Lovely to have you with us tonight. So we are the titular Trope Stormers.
Yeah, and we're back after a significant hiatus.
Yep.
Hiatus.
Life got in the way. We've been doing a lot of life admin.
Yeah. I was off marrying my brother, so to speak.
There you go.
And you went and bloody well got a job, didn't you?
Bloody got who would have hired me, eh? Not me. So I got a new job.
IRL.
Yes. And also had some family drama, but we won't touch on that.
Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, trope storming, it don't pay the bills.
No, it's on the back burner until we hit the big time, and we can't do that without all you lovely listeners' ears and help.
Absolutely, but we're back now.
We are back with hopefully some more regularity.
Yes, and somewhat of vengeance.
Yes. So shall we regale our listeners with the why we are here bit?
Well, I'm here to storm tropes and drink beer.
Strong. We've already had pizza.
We've already had pizza. I'm going to lay off the beer, actually. It's making me a bit gassy.
Okay.
So that leaves me to storm tropes.
Indeed. We're unchaperoned, our better halves aren't here, and we're basically running riot and recording gibberish.
Yeah.
Hot waffle.
Organised gibberish.
Yeah. So, why are we here? Well, it's to pass ill-informed judgment over TV, film, and video games, using our patented, wholly unscientific scoring system. We'll decide whether our chosen feature film for today is dystopian or utropian. I'm excited.
We're back.
Yep. So these tropes of which we speak, what are they? Well, Urban Dictionary will have you believe it's an overused plot device. Not all tropes are bad, however. Can we think of an example of a good trope?
Well, I suppose last time round we have Rocky, which has a series of tropes which were detailed in the last, and might I say, excellent episode.
Well, go back and listen if you haven't already. Go the distance.
One of the main ones is, the idea of going the distance.
Yep.
That tenacity, that keeping at it, sticking at it, rolling with the punches, literally, and seeing it through.
Yep.
But also the zero to hero aspect of it with Rocky in particular. He starts out as a bit of a schmuck.
You're a bum rock.
Your average bum. Yeah, he then becomes a contender. One of the biggest arenas, the boxing profession, and fights a heavyweight champion of the world, and goes the distance.
It also gave the world the montage on a big stage.
Yes, I mean, I guess that is, even though that kind of originated the montage proper, I would argue, and also the drinking of eggs was a trope maker, it's become a bit of a dead horse trope, which is used a bit too much these days.
Cheaply, I would say.
Cheaply, but that's a classic example of the trope, the training montage, as well as the idea of the zero to hero, and that ending of going the distance. So that's some 3 classic tropes illustrated there.
Yeah, explored in great detail in our previous podcast. Check it out if you haven't already.
Yeah, so, these tropes won't storm themselves. There's plenty out there.
Well, we spotted what we think is a gap in the market, and we're hoping to exploit it so that we can become rich and not have to do our everyday jobs, right?
Yeah, which kind of negates you getting this one, but I mean, we're working on it,
it's
aren't
a
we?
work in progress.
We're working on making this a full-time gig.
Yeah, for sure.
So please help us.
That's the dream.
Subscribe.
Please, like and subscribe.
Right. Well, I don't suppose we can start this without addressing something that's quite big. I mean, we had a bit of debate about what we were going to do this week, in previous weeks, and
there was a lot of faff and toing and froing before we finally settled on something.
A lot of WhatsApp bollocks.
Yeah, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was in the frame at one point.
Yeah, I'm not ruling it out any further. That's a quality film.
Bob Hoskins.
You know, lots to explore there. And linked to the late, great Bob Hoskins, we also lost this month Rutger Hauer.
We did. Do you want to know something interesting about Rutger Hauer's death? Now, obviously, God rest your soul, Rutger Hauer, but it is timely because the film in which he shot to prominence, Blade Runner from 1982, the year that was set was 2019 in Los Angeles, and he's died in 2019. So there's almost a nice theatrical sort of circularity to that.
A poetry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
and he did a lot of great...
imitating art.
He did a lot of great work. This is probably, I would argue, his seminal...
Well, from my research, Rutger Hauer said it's a favourite of his films that he was in.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well,
pinned his colours to the mast on this one.
The man himself. And I would agree, it's a role that really puts him on the map. You can tell he enjoyed doing it in Blade Runner. We'll explore his character a little bit further. But he was in other stuff as well. I remember growing up, there's kind of one of the great examples of a Western take on a kung fu film in Blind Fury. Have you ever seen that?
No.
Where he's basically a blind guy who
is furious.
Is furious and expresses that furious through the mode of beating people up.
Yeah.
Great, check that out if you haven't seen it already. It's quite cheesy, it's of its time, but again, you can tell this guy's having a lot of fun in the roles that he's playing. My auntie always reminds me he was in the Guinness ads as well.
Was he?
Yeah, he was. I didn't actually know him as Rutger Hauer for years. He was known as the Guinness old lad in our household.
Oh, yeah, it's so northern.
Divided by a common language up in the north. Great work he did as well. He's also in Batman Begins quite recently. He played a lot of kind of minor roles. He's a background villain.
Who was he in Batman Begins?
He's like this greedy corporate type who tries to take over Wayne Enterprises and then gets his comeuppance at the end. But yeah, plays a great part. Quite an intense guy. He's in Sin City as well.
Again, who's he in Sin City?
He is Bishop Rourke, I think.
Serious?
Like a corrupt bishop.
Oh, I know the character.
Yeah.
I just didn't realise it was him.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's got a lot of, obviously a main role in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
But more widely, fantastic array of roles and
range.
As a character, we'll explore his character here, but as a real life character, he seemed like a man who really respected his art, really enjoyed what he did, and he'll be a big miss, certainly amongst the trope storming community.
Indeed. So I guess, without further ado, for those who might not have realised, tonight's feature presentation is Blade Runner, 1982's Blade Runner, directed by Mr. Ridley Scott.
Ridley Scott
of Alien, possibly my favourite horror film. I'm sure I've said this many times on this podcast. He also did Thelma and Louise, which I'd forgotten.
Oh, Gladiator,
The Martian.
Okay, right, yeah, that's a bit of an unsung modern classic. And
he's got, there are some stinkers in there, which I'm not going to bother mentioning. But Thelma and Louise, quite a departure and a great film, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, he's usually known for doing films on a certain scale, isn't he? And I mean, I'm not saying Thelma and Louise is small scale, but it's a more intimate story.
It's not set in space or the future.
That is true, yeah. Otherwise, they would have had a flying car, and that would have solved a lot of problems.
Exactly.
Not to spoil Thelma and Louise. I mean, we did say at in the outset, we will spoil a lot of films.
We always do. But I kind of, even before I'd seen Thelma and Louise, I knew what was going to happen. And I think Wayne's World was the reason for that, because I swear they send it up in that.
Yeah, they do a series of endings, don't they?
Yeah, the Scooby-Doo ending, the Thelma and Louise ending. Speaking of endings, as a segue, we're learning from the best here.
Well, the apprentice has become the master.
So, how many endings do you think Blade Runner has had?
This sounds like it's going to be more than 2, which is, I would call several.
As far as I'm aware, it's only 2.
Okay.
But that's one more than most movies.
But this has been released several times.
Exactly. Which is a bit greedy in my book, but not Ridley's fault. I'm going to call him Ridley. We're on first name basis now.
All right, okay.
Mr. Scott to you. Although Mr. Scott makes it sound like Star Trek, so maybe Ridley's better. There were a lot of problems with this film being made. Ridley Scott, it was the first film that he did in America, and the rules are different over there to they are over here in Blighty. He loves to sit behind the camera and get involved and play cameraman. Not in America.
Those bloody septics.
Right. Took me a second.
Septic tank.
Yeah. Got ya.
Yeah.
Yank. Filming ended, the last scene with Rutger Hauer in the rain making his beautiful speech ended hours before the studio basically pulled the plug. Filming had luckily been done, but Ridley Scott was fired from the project only to then be rehired at a later date. And so the original theatrical theatrical release in 1982 featured a different ending and was hammed up in a sort of film noir style with an awful narration, I suppose, at the beginning by Deckard, voiced by Harrison Ford.
Played by Harrison Ford. And rumour has it that Harrison Ford was so disgusted with this that he did the narration badly on purpose so that it wouldn't get used. He's a bit of a grump, isn't he? Just generally, like when he's not crapping all over Star Wars and crashing planes.
Or throwing Nazis out of blimps.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
He's disgruntled at that point. No ticket.
The writing was on the wall there. A grumpy guy. Anyway, I can understand why he might have had reservations about doing a whole load of narration over
He didn't want to compromise his art, did he?
a very long film, as it turns out. But yeah, Harrison Ford's in this. Rutger Hauer's in this, as we established.
The sort of who's who of movie drops off a cliff a little bit at that point for me. The only other person in it who I sort of... Oh, actually, that's a lie. Daryl Hannah. This was one of her early films.
Pre-Splash.
Yeah. Pre-Splash. She's called Pre in the movie. That was either very clever or totally unintentional.
You credit me too much. She was a bit of a crush of mine early on, seeing her as a...
Was it the Adamant Stripe? Was that what did it for you?
No, not in this film. It's like more of a, that kind of REM thing going on. I wasn't into that. I was very much about seeing her as a beautiful mermaid. And she's been in things like Kill Bill since, so she's, got... There you go. Kill Bill, teaser, coming up for future pods. You have a mixture of, because Blade Runner is about artificial intelligence, it's about technology.
The nature of reality and what it is to be alive.
Yeah, to be alive, to be human. You get a mix of a cast of characters who play humans as well as replicants, as they're called.
Yes.
In the film. What is the gist of this?
What is the gist of this film?
Elevator pitch.
Elevator pitch. Okay. Sit down, listen to this, Johnny. So you have a weary former police officer who is a specialist in hunting down androids, or replicants as they're known. It's set in the future for when it was made, so it's set in 2019 in Los Angeles.
The distant future.
The distant but near future, and the world has gone tits up, basically. The Earth is barely inhabitable, everyone's going to live in space, and everyone that's been left behind is on this decaying, dystopian, crumbling, nightmare, techno, steampunk world of neon, darkness, and rain and smoke.
Middlesbrough, basically.
Yeah, basically describes the North, I think, for a lot of people. So the premise is that these replicants, robots, androids, they normally work off-planet. They're not allowed on planet Earth. They do dangerous jobs like mining in faraway planets and worlds. A bunch of them stole a space shuttle, murdered a load of people, and are on Earth. And it is Harrison Ford as Deckard, his job to track them down and retire them. That's the technical term used.
By Blade Runners.
By Blade Runners, of which he is one.
He is. Never really explained why he's called a Blade Runner. I guess it's that trope of things just sounding cool.
Yes, it is actually because it sounded cool. Blade Runner does not feature at all in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, the novel which the movie is based loosely upon, which Ridley Scott never watched. I don't know how he did this. It's a great book. I recommend it. But no, Blade Runner is taken from William S. Burroughs' Blade Runner, a movie, a film based on a novel by Alan Nourse. Originally, the film Blade Runner was entitled Dangerous Days, which is a terrible title in my opinion.
Yeah,
it sounds straight to B movie. That's like, I'm in Blockbuster and there's a bargain bucket, and for £1 I can have Dangerous Days.
Yeah, I mean, Blade Runner says absolutely nothing about the film, really, itself. I mean, it's got a certain chase connotation to it, but, yeah, it's one of these things that's kind of, I suppose we'll get onto it a little bit about the style of the movie, but it's very stylistic. Very film noir.
I need your clothes, your boots, and you to subscribe to the Tropes Thomas podcast. Do it now!
So stylistically, this is very heavy on noir. It's almost permanently in dark or some kind of blue shade or filter a lot of the time.
A lot of rain.
Yeah, a lot of rain.
A lot of heavy synth going on, very foreboding synth soundtrack by Vangelis.
Yeah, that's one thing about this, is the soundtrack is as groundbreaking as the visuals in this. Really. It's like nothing you've ever heard.
It still sounds all right. Like you'd imagine it would sound pretty dated and naff, but it's still very cinematic and works very well with the visuals.
What did they bring him back for the 2049?
I don't think they did. Hans Zimmer, I think, was credited with the score. Whether Vangelis was involved, whether he's still alive, I'm not sure, to be honest.
But having Hans Zimmer try and recreate that sort of thing is I suppose, is a compliment.
Well, it's him or John Williams, isn't it, as far as I understand it?
In terms of the film as a whole, in terms of visuals, in terms of what it did, I suppose it's going to lead on to the first trope. In terms of visuals, the style, it was really, really quite groundbreaking. And I remember watching this. I was born in '86. I didn't see this until 10 years after that. But it really stood up in terms of the way it looked, the impact it had visually. You had the advert with the geisha. You have the visuals of the flames heading up into the sky from the cityscape.
All the huge neon of like corporate advertising. Yeah,
which I guess it nailed a lot of the sort of things that would be yet to come. Just not flying cars.
Not yet. I mean, Back to the Future and that really told fibs, like misleading.
I mean, I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the year, but it's going to have to pick up the pace to get there.
Times are running out.
Yeah, we might have to. There's umbrellas with glowy sticks.
It's one thing at a time.
So we might be able to manage that.
Just to briefly interject. I mentioned all the corporates involved. Apparently, there's such a thing, or there was a thing as the curse of Blade Runner. So a lot of the companies that feature in it, Atari, Pan Am, RCA, Bell Phones, all pretty much went down the toilet shortly afterwards. Even Coca-Cola, which featured very prominently at one point, introduced its new Coke a few years after Blade Runner came out, and that almost tanked the company.
I suppose that's what you do when you advertise on scorched earth dystopias. It doesn't really reflect well on the product.
No, you wonder if they actually knew what they were signing up to.
Yeah, they probably thought it would be a bit more sunshine and lollipops.
Yeah.
Kind of gig.
And a windfall of money.
So yeah, that's an interesting bit of trivia. As ever, we've got to bring it back to the tropes.
Old lighthouse man.
So my first trope is linked to what we're saying about the noir. And one thing this film does incredibly well is blends a lot of influences together to create something that's quite unique. You have a lot of the things that are explored in things like Metropolis and a lot of cinematic influences before that. with like flying cars and the visuals of cityscapes, but it also blends it well with noir and hard-boiled kind of detective fiction. So things like Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep and Philip Marlowe is part of that kind of hard-boiled detective. You have the raw sci-fi elements of the replicants, the off-world colonies, the wider universe that's established around that as well. So there's a real blend of genres that come together.
It's a real mashup, isn't it?
A real genre mashup, yeah.
Heinz 57 of genre.
Wow, yeah. So praise indeed.
And we touched on universes here, and we were talking before about a bit of a Ridley Scott Universal overlap with the Alien franchise.
Yeah, this blew my mind when you told me about this.
Yeah. So
how does Alien link with?
Well, I'll tell you.
Blade Runner.
So apparently in some Blu-ray extras for, I think, Prometheus, it basically alludes to the idea that Peter Weyland was the protege of Eldon Tyrell from Blade Runner. There's a continuity there. And this is something that apparently Ridley Scott also endorsed. He didn't deny it. There's a thought that synths, as they are called in Alien, are an evolution of the replicants from Blade Runner. So these two universes exist together, and Alien is a continuation of Blade Runner.
Exploring the ideas of wider universes before the Marvel universe. I know the Alien universe kind of spilt over into Predator at one point as well. So is Blade Runner within the Predator-verse?
I had high hopes for Alien vs. Predator, and they were dashed.
Yeah.
I always kind of like to, it's like anything past Aliens, I just pretend didn't happen.
There were bits of that which were interesting. I'm not sure about the giant Antarctic Mayan pyramid thing.
Yeah, they're just naff.
Yeah.
It's just all a bit naff. I mean, all of that came about because of a computer game, didn't it?
A very good one.
A very good one of its time. But then they decided, let's make a movie out of this.
Video game movies is probably a topic we can probably cover because they don't
go well, do they?
They don't fare too well. Maybe that's a step too far, is the leap into the Predator averse. The Alien, the Weyland-Yutani Tyrell Corporation link, I like that. I like the idea of that.
Well, apparently Ridley Scott was originally toying with the idea of calling it Tyrell Weyland in the Alien franchise as a very obvious nod, but decided to just use Weyland to keep it sort of more ambiguous.
The plot thickens.
Yeah.
I suppose it goes on to serve how well this works as an established universe in itself. That mix of styles. You've got the Blade Runners who are part of the LAPD. They do tests, checking people for replicant status. They're part of this big, wider system of off-world colonies and this sprawling metropolis, this monster that LA has now become. And it just works so well within the mashup of sci-fi, hard sci-fi, and this detective story that pans out.
It lends itself well because you do have a kind of LA 2019 feels a bit Wild West. Like there's always a throng of people. It seems quite lawless, but then at the same time, it almost feels a bit like a police state. Like the police are never far away from when trouble breaks, but it has that sort of almost lawless feel to it.
Because, I mean, the replicants themselves are obviously causing havoc. And I suppose this brings us nicely onto what you're going to talk about next, the idea that the replicants themselves are a real focus point. Rutger Hauer's character we've alluded to, who's called Roy Batty.
Roy Batty.
Bit of a Yorkshireman sounding to that, I reckon. Roy Batty.
Oh, really?
He don't talk like that in film, but...
imagine if he did.
Oh, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it? Blade Runner set in Leeds.
With the Hovis music in the background.
And maybe it's, Alan Bennett as Deckard.
Talking of people who could play Deckard, people that were being lined up for this were Robert Mitchum, Christopher Walken.
Oh, imagine the vocalisation.
And Tommy Lee Jones, who does Unhinged pretty well. But also Dustin Hoffman was actually agreed to the role. However, Ridley Scott reckoned he lost interest, or more likely, the paycheck wasn't up to scratch. I
can see a lot of those shouts. Tommy Lee Jones is quite grizzled. It seems to have been like that for 40 years.
He'd play the rogue cop well. Christopher Walken. I just can't take him seriously.
I can see him playing anything. I will watch that man in any role.
What about Jungle Book?
Oh, he played that big giant orangutan thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe not.
So my first trope to talk about tonight, Deckard. Is he human? Is he a replicant? There is an ambiguity there. I will come back to this later on, but this film pitches man versus the machine. The machine of man's own creation, the Tyrell core, created the Nexus 6 to be more human than human, the motto of the company. And this is, I guess, something that we touched on in our Storm in a Tea Break as well. Man versus machine. And in this instance, machine being quite evil. Or turning evil. We don't know what all the other replicants off-world are up to. They're probably just fighting wars and mining mines and stuff quite happily.
I mean, their motivations, because the replicants, led by Rutger Hauer,
yep.
Roy Batty.
Roy.
I think their motivation is they want to live longer, right?
Well, that's the thing, like, the Nexus 6 is designed to copy humans in every conceivable way. The problem is, with emotions, they struggle to assimilate and learn to deal with emotions. And I think the worry is that they'll exceed their programming and can't be controlled. So they build in a failsafe, which is the 4-year lifespan. So they've got 4 years from creation to basically learn and copy emotions and how to use them. Which kind of explains in a lot of ways how, I don't know if you noticed this watching it, Rutger Hauer's performance is really captivating because sometimes he reacts to things like a child might. And you've kind of got to remember that these creations haven't had long to sort of learn how to cope with the world around them and everything that's being thrown at them. So it's actually quite fascinating when you bear that in mind. Like, they are quite childlike, the replicants, bordering on naive in a lot of ways.
I mean, it's Leon. I forget the actor's name who plays Leon. He's he's the replicant sidekick to Roy.
He is. He's the one who takes the test at the beginning and then shoots the other Blade Runner.
Yes, there's a bit of exposition showing how dangerous
the replicants can be,
because he's why he's got a gun in that scene, I don't know.
How he got a gun in that scene, unless he's got like a RoboCop leg gun holder.
That can be the only explanation.
Finally sold. You're welcome.
Least the RoboCop-averse.
Exactly. He also has my favourite line in the film: "Wake up, time to die." When he's beating the crap out of Deckard before he gets shot by Rachel.
Yeah, in that slightly Deus Ex rescue moment. Really important and mature themes explored in this. I really like what you said about the kind of childlike nature, and it's testament to how Rutger Hauer plays things. And I'm led to believe there's also a lot of improvisation on his part.
Yeah, well, a lot of the catching of the dove and quite a big chunk of his final speech, he improv'd himself and came up with it.
The Tears in the Rain.
Tears in the Rain, yeah, that was him. That's one of his own. He can claim that one.
I mean, that's incredible, because that's stood the test of time in terms of film quotes. That is, that's on posters when you see famous movie quotes. You used to buy them from HMV when you're at university. You go and get 3 for a tenner. And you'd have things like that were on there. And to have improvised quotes immortalised like that is quite something.
The man versus machine angle, it became apparent to me, even though it's almost ironic, they use this Voight-Kampff test, and it's meant to elicit an emotional response, a blush response, a dilation of capillaries in the eyes, things which, you do without thinking. And that's how they spot the replicants. But throughout the film, when Roy discovers that the other replicants have died, especially when Pre is killed by Deckard, he starts howling, he starts crying. There's a huge emotional release, which, as we said before, he struggles to deal with it in his sort of childlike emotional state. But compared to Deckard, compared to all the supposedly human characters within the film, it's actually the replicants who show more humanity, more empathy, seem more real almost for it.
It's not only man versus machine as in the Terminator Matrix sense.
It's not just a face-off. It's not like, guns at dawn.
But the idea that it's like who's the search for a creator, which almost lends itself back to Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. The idea of...
or the Wizard of Oz. Search for a creator or a parental figure or sort of searching for their own meaning in a way.
Because I noticed, although it's quite a murderous character, Roy and his crew.
Well, he's a military combat model.
Oh, Roy.
Oh, right.
He's an interesting villain because a lot of the time he seems quite verbose and quite poetic. There's a sort of calm, sinister nature to him. But when he's talking to Tyrell, he's talking to him as if he's a father. And he's talking quite calmly. And then he's almost apologetic when he's actually
killing him by
poking his eyes through the back of his head.
Yeah. But he almost seems conflicted, like, in doing that. There's almost like a pleasure out of it, but also a pain at the same time.
Because it's at that point he's told, like, he can't have his life prolonged. He's essentially, within that hour, he's a dead man.
Yeah. Really. He's already started not falling apart, but breaking down. Like the shots where you see his like clenched hand is sort of meant to be part of his sort of disintegration. The thing is, like in a man versus machine and sort of searching for a creator or potential like parental figure, like Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster who seeks to wreak revenge on Frankenstein, or the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz who wants a heart, Scarecrow wants a brain. They're all coming looking for sort of solutions, and so is Roy in trying to extend their lifespan. However, they don't set off on that course originally because they're made by the Tyrell Corporation. I'm sure they must know this, but they don't go looking for Tyrell straight away because they accost the Asian guy who makes eyes. Then he puts them onto J.F. Sebastian, and it seems to be through chance J.F. Sebastian plays chess with Tyrell, but if they were being sort of more methodical, they probably would have just gone straight for Tyrell and quit all the sort of fannying about in downtown LA. Wouldn't have made it for a good story, but...
So Sebastian is he's the guy who does the all nuances and looks and genetics of the...
Yeah, he has all those weird robot toys.
Yeah, there's some creepy scenes of like weird little Napoleon...
Yeah, with like a cock nose.
Yeah, yeah, for want of a better... description, yeah, cock-nosed Napoleon cracking about.
Yeah.
After all that nuanced discussion of fatherhood and creation, we're back in the room. So yeah, welcome back.
Well, there's a whole facet to this. I don't know if you've read Duandra's Dream of Electric Sheep, but as is often the case with books that become films, that you can't film a whole book because often there's too much source material and depth. So, and Ridley Scott didn't even bother reading this one. But there's a whole section to this that is just not covered really in the film. The bit with animals in the book, this is a huge bit because all the animals are dead, so all the animals are fake, and there's a high price put on the ownership, and there's a real sort of status symbol is owning any sort of an animal, even though they're all fakes. And there's also a religious aspect to it as well. There have these things in it called empathy boxes. Basically, you hold these handles, dial a number, and it will make you feel your chosen empathy.
Okay.
And Deckard has a wife who he lives with in the book as well.
That's interesting.
So it's quite a lot of departures, like quite a lot of artistic license taken with the movie.
I know Zora at one point, who is the first replicant.
She's a snake woman.
She's killed by Deckard.
Yeah.
Falling through an impossible number of panes of glass.
She basically just runs through them.
Yeah.
These things are badass.
It's like she gets shot and then runs through about 18 panes of glass.
Yeah, in slow motion. And I don't know about you, but running through glass is doubly hard in slow motion.
I'll take your word for it. But she actually mentions about the snake. I can't afford a real snake. She says before she's revealed to be a replicant proper and then retired. Mm-hmm. There are little nods to the original source material, but yeah, as you say, the breadth of it to be explored is probably, that's for further films, I suppose. Yeah. That's a very rich, positive trope. It's probably one of the films where this is best explored. There's been others since, of course, but this is a big leap forward in terms of that sort of thing. So on the flip side, this is a detective story as well as sci-fi.
Yep.
It does lean pretty hard into some pretty dead horse,
bit
hackneyed tropes sometimes. The original theatrical cut, as we said, originally intended to have a
happy ending, a go into the sunset ending.
Well, we'll come on to that very soon.
My bad.
The voiceover, the narration,
yeah. Film noir narration,
which, having seen versions, the desired version by Ridley Scott, just sounds like it'd be awful, completely take you out of the.
Well, apparently they did it because it tested so badly. Apparently, when they showed it in the cinemas originally to test audiences, they just didn't go for it at all, and the responses included they didn't understand it. It was hard to follow. Nothing really happened. So apparently, to sort of help the narrative, they added this sort of very film noir sort of scripted narration to it to sort of add a sort of richness and guide the observer. It also tanked at the cinema as well when it was released. This film cost $28 million in 1982. It made $35 million. Ouch.
Yikes.
Yeah.
It came out at the same time as E.T., didn't it?
It was, yeah. It was actually E.T., The Thing, and...
What a film.
There was something else as well. Like, it was like an insane time for like movies coming out, and yeah, tough crowd. Like Blade Runner just couldn't stand out. Next to family-friendly, glowy heart, long-fingered, bicycle-flying E.T. monster alien kid.
That covers it. Yeah, that's the reason for the tanking. Screw that test audience. What do they know?
Clearly nothing.
Obviously, Ridley Scott went on to ignore them, and eventually the version I'm most familiar with.
I wonder if you could even buy like the original version anymore. Not that anyone buys media anymore, really.
Got Bryant, who's like his superior. Brings him in as the most heavy-handed exposition of, like, for some reason they have to seem to explain to Deckard, who is a Blade Runner, what a replicant is and what the purpose of the Nexus 6 was.
I guess, he might have been out of action for a little while. It kind of seems like he was brought back against his will, didn't want to do it, had a slug of whiskey, got threatened, job done.
Yeah, well, a slug of whiskey. This guy... he must be like 70% alcohol.
He puts them away.
Every other scene, it's like, we get it. The guy likes a drink.
Well, he's your, what did you call him? Hard-boiled detective copper man.
Yeah, so it leans quite... Because it's a long film, right?
Yeah, it's a good 2 hours. It clocks up.
And it leans in, like, a good 5% of that must be him just chugging on... bevies, or
at one point when Rachel first comes round to his flat, he makes her a drink and she sort of leaves in a huff. I reckon he necked hers as well.
Oh yeah, definitely some off-screen non-mise-en-scène.
Totally necked it.
Chugging going on there. So there seems to be like a lot of smoke. He's also got the badass long coat trope.
The duster.
It looks pretty cool. Although I really like the mashup element of it, it seems to rely very heavily on some
rather worn out sort of archetypes. The femme fatale as well, like that's pretty well worn, and especially in the sort of film noir, like it's always a dame, isn't it? She could have walked into any office and she walked into mine. And
so I can see why they fell into the trap of doing narration as part of that.
It sort of leads itself to that kind of, 1950s sort of copper, the private eye sort of a guy.
Private Dick.
he's got a bottle of scotch in the bottom drawer of his cabinet, and
It's broad.
his broad's gone missing, and he's got to go strong arm someone, or I don't know. Vinny the Thumb's got to be put in his place.
Vinny the Thumb.
You can tell I move in some pretty nefarious circles. Clearly,
The Aldershot underworld.
careful.
Yeah, you know a few guys.
I know a firm.
Yeah, so for me, although I love the genre mashup, man versus machine aspect of it, some of the hard-boiled cliches do put a dent.
Stick out a bit like sore thumbs.
They do a bit, like Vinny
Vinny the Thumb.
So that's it for me. Now, you talked about ambiguity.
I did. So another ambiguity in this is, and this is purely going by the director's cut and the final cut, how does it end? Do we know? Well, we don't really know. Because in the theatrical original release, we do know. We know that they go off into the sunset. Side tangent, the footage was reused from The Shining, stuff that didn't make the cut. Apparently this film, Blade Runner, money was tight, and at one point there is a model of the Millennium Falcon being used as part of the cityscape.
We'll have to put that on Twitter if we can see it.
If we can find it and draw a really crude circle around it and an arrow, job done.
Private detective style.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Apparently it's by the police station.
Okay, I'm on it. So for a Blade Runner, for him to go off into the sunset with a replicant seems a bit incongruous.
Well, the thing as well is, in that ending, what's the guy's name? The other copper? Gaff. What a name. He tells Deckard that Rachel isn't like other replicants. She doesn't have a lifespan. She'll just live on like a human. So I guess that sort of adds to, I mean, the whole fact he fell in love with her is a bit weird anyway. Maybe that sort of adds to the idea that he's an android himself and doesn't realise it and has implanted false memories.
And he's had a few.
And he's probably had a skinful. He probably is not in a place to make these judgments.
He doesn't know what day it is.
He can't tell if they're human or replicant. He's past the point of caring. But then in the director's and final cut versions, he goes back to his apartment. Rachel's skulking about in the dark. He says, "Do you love me? Do you trust me?" She's like, "Oh yeah." And then they elope, but they leave the apartment. And this touches on something that confused me initially. The dream sequence, where there's a unicorn scampering about. Very incongruous within the film. And also why Gaff randomly makes origami. Seemingly for no reason, just for fun, when he should be detecting stuff.
He's not a very helpful copper.
He's useless. He speaks some weird pidgin Chinese English mashup Creole, and basically is the dragon for Bryant.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. He's, because, they're not very helpful cops.
No.
Either of them.
But when Deckard and Rachel leave at the end, there is an origami unicorn. Now, Ridley Scott apparently thought this was his way of saying, actually, Deckard is a replicant himself. The only way Gaff could have known about the unicorn is if he'd seen his file and seen what memories Deckard had been implanted with. Harrison Ford has always strenuously denied this and is adamant that Deckard is a human. Apparently Harrison Ford and Scott didn't get on.
Yeah, and he's the grumpiest old man.
He's a very grumpy... He was an old man at this point. He was a grumpy, middle-aged man.
The beauty of something like an ambiguous ending is it leaves room for a lot of debate, and it serves a lot of the themes of the film that exist already.
It can also be incredibly frustrating for anyone that likes closure.
Yeah, and also plot.
Tying up
holes. It's a bit like Swiss cheese.
It is a bit just on the Swiss cheese. Another example that just sprung to mind of this, have you seen Lost in Translation?
Yes, Bill Murray.
Yeah. Scarlett Johansson, I believe. The end. When he sees her in the street and he goes over and he whispers something to her and you have no idea what he says to her and how it's left between the two of them. After all that, similar, an ambiguous ending.
Yeah. I mean, it's a problem with this, isn't it? Because you've had that many releases and different... You actually have a case of one which is definitive and one which is an ambiguous.
Who are you to believe?
That's very rare, you know. Lost in Translation has one ending.
Not 7.
That's the difficulty with this. It's considered a masterpiece. However, how many pieces is this in?
Who are we to believe? You know, are we going to be whores for the movie industry and go with the theatrical original? Or are we going to be fanboys of Ridders and allow him to have his moment in the sun?
So, are we coming to a point where we've got to make a decision?
I think it's time to score some tropes.
Dystopia or utopia?
That is the question.
Okay. So, let's top this up.
Should we break it down quickly?
Let's break it down.
Okay. First up,
genre mashup. We've got, I love this. Visually, it creates some really interesting stuff. Badass long coat, the whole noir-looking rain, cityscape, a good translation of a lot of the stuff you see in things like the visuals from Sin City and things like that. That obviously took influence from stuff like this.
It had a huge impact visually and stylistically. Like Ghost in the Shell was credited with being massively inspired by this. The Matrix was clearly inspired.
Absolutely.
Like a lot of films, stylistically, probably wouldn't have looked anywhere near as good. Like the amount of stuff this spawned or influenced. And it's one of the few films that I can think of off the top of my head, although it's an animation, Achor is another one, that were made donkeys years ago, still look incredible.
This is Christopher Walken, and you're listening to the Trope Stormers podcast. Subscribe. Why not? Do it now.
Apparently Philip K. Dick, who said, it was my own interior world. They caught it perfectly.
Yeah, and he only saw the first 20 minutes.
Yeah, so, you know, that's some praise.
He tragically died before it was released.
It blends a lot together. The detective story, however it ends, it does work for the most part.
The Western feel.
The sort of Wild West anarchy of the whole thing.
Yeah.
The hard sci-fi with the off-world colonies, as well as, you know, a lot of the grittiness of Earth.
The kind of almost like... Have you ever seen the film Brazil?
Yes.
You know how it's kind
Terry Gilliam.
Yeah, set in the future, but everything is either really futuristic or a bit naff and broken. And
Yeah.
that sort of like jarring juxtaposition.
Again, on the positive side, we've got the man versus machine themes explored within that. So you've got this slightly broken universe. And at the same time, you've got this synergy with that and the duality of certainly Rutger Hauer's character and his band of replicants. This idea that, you know, who is who, depending on what version you're looking at.
The humanity of it all. And I mean, it could have been very sort of simply, you know, humans pitched against machines. It could have been sort of very one level, but it sort of inverted it or subverted it. You know, machines could have humanity and maybe even more humanity than their creators. Maybe they've usurped them in a way.
Certainly the performances, just a tribute again of Rutger Hauer, you're talking about this childlike nature of, you know, learning things hyper quickly, processing emotions and being quite volatile, but at the same time there's this sensitivity, there's this tenderness, there's this just fascinating characters that are produced off the back of that who feel very human. However, we've got to look at the flip side of things as well. This is widely thought of as being a masterpiece, but we're not thinking about this. We're looking at it in terms of the tropes.
There's an underbelly.
Dead horse tropes.
Oh, I know you're a stickler for these.
I'm a stickler. We've got the hard-boiled cliches that come up, the heavy drinking.
I mean, is that as bad as Mary Sue?
Well, you mentioned this as well.
I did mention this. Deckard does get a bit Mary Sue towards the end. I mean, if I had 2 broken fingers, I'm not climbing up a building or fighting a robot that was created for military and combat purposes.
Yeah, he seems to get lucky quite a few times.
A little bit lucky.
He can manage to fight kill a robot.
He's also doing this whilst half cut all the time.
Yeah, so he's off his nut.
Maybe that's it. Maybe he's just pissed and doesn't feel his fingers being all busted up.
Perhaps.
Maybe he's just like, in that sort of... It's like he's playing a game of pool after a couple of pints and every shot's just going in.
Yeah.
Not overthinking it.
So, even though the visuals are quite strong, there's rain coming down, you've got that pathetic fallacy all the time, he's drinking away, his character is a little bit heavy-handed, really. You could argue that Deckard is he's not the worst part of the film, but he's not as interesting as the exploration of the characters. I know he's supposed to be the focal point, and Ridley Scott perhaps wanted him to be more of a question mark.
Yeah, I mean, because another one of these dead horses is the femme fatale that's part of the whole film noir genre, and that being Rachel. I never really liked her as a character, and I didn't know whether that was just because she played it really well in that she was quite wooden, in the way that, she's the same model Nexus 6 as Roy, but she's been, hanging around with Tyrell, probably bored out of her mind half the time, not seeing attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion or whatever.
Chuffing fags with owls.
Exactly. Chuffing fags. She chuffs a lot of fags.
Cigarettes for our...
Yes.
American listeners.
For our broader audience, we love you all. I didn't know if it was just like wooden acting, poor script, or actually she was playing the character as maybe you'd expect, like someone who was not human but not out and out a robot. And maybe that was good to contrast against Roy, who had totally broken out of being what you might stereotypically think as a robotic character.
It's going to hang for me on, because we've got these multiple endings. Now, do you want to talk us through a little bit what you think about
those endings,
the ambiguous endings? Because this is a big black mark for me, is if the theatrical release has...
Away to the Sunset.
Yeah, a happy ending.
No unicorn.
No unicorns, ironically. Milk and honey.
Well, the thing is, it is ambiguous, but I think there's almost enough nods that we kind of have an idea of what's going on. Because earlier in the film, Rachel does say to Deckard, I'm thinking of going north. If I went there, do you think anyone would follow me? And he's like, oh, I don't think so. And he's like, would you follow me? And he's like, oh, no, I don't think I would. So that's almost like she's foreshadowing that that's her intention. And then when they meet up later on, and, the unicorn sequence referenced by the origami with that as well kind of suggests that they are sort of running off. Maybe we're not seeing it. Maybe they're not filming going off into the sunset, but they are going on a runner, and, it's ambiguity. Like, how would you want that to end? Would you want them to go on a run and get caught? Would you want them to go on a run and get away? Go off world, maybe? Like, the film's already run to 2 hours. Like, do we want to add another, opening up for a sequel? I mean,
it gets explored in 2049.
It does.
But that's decades.
And originally, I don't think they were going to make a sequel.
No.
I'm kind of giving the ambiguity a bit of. I'm not giving it a hard time. It doesn't. I
don't have a problem with the ambiguity.
Okay. Multiple endings, multiple versions.
It's the versions.
Are you saying the sort of the muddled? Like, I could be talking to you right now, and you've never seen the director's cut, and you think Blade Runner's shit because of how it ended, and I'm like, what are you on about? It's amazing, it's a masterpiece, blah blah blah. The ending is like ambiguous and brilliant for it, and you're like, wait, that's not how the film ended. Like, two people could have watched the same film and had a totally different outlook on it.
Yeah,
and you could have been like the hammy dialogue at the beginning, the narration, and I'd be like, what about the unicorn? You'd be like, there's no fucking unicorn in this film. Yeah,
so there's no unicorn, there's no origami.
There's no hammy narration. There's
in the latest versions, as Ridley Scott intended.
But Ridders intended it to go the director's cut way. It was the studio getting involved that led to this really awful theatrical release. So are we blaming capitalism? Are we getting mad at capitalism and, studio greed, chasing the Yankee dollar? Or are we championing artistic freedom for Mr. Ridders?
Well,
what side are we buttering our crumpets?
Let's bear that caveat in mind, right? Where Ridders is concerned, Mr. Scott, his conscience is clear, I think, because he had an idea and a vision for the film. He got fired and then brought back. That's not really his fault initially, how the initial theatrical release. So let's put him, on the sidelines just for a second.
Okay.
Yeah? He's out of the firing line.
Well, I don't want to let the studio win. I don't want corporate greed to win. So I think that the ambiguous ending is fine because Ridley Scott got his way in the end and we should give him a pass for that. I know that basically leads us to a tie-break situation. We don't do tie-breaks.
No, it's got to be dystopia or utopia.
So, to bring it back to a football analogy, it's the end of, normal time. It's extra time. So we're going to have to play out a final deciding trope.
Golden goal.
Just a recap of the scores for you. So the genre mashup was a beautifully worked trope. We'll take that.
Yeah. Smashed
in from 40 yards. Lots of build-up play. I'm really going with my football cliches now. However, unfortunately, we then conceded a nasty goal to just a bobble-in off the shin cliche from the hard-boiled school
of detective genre dead horse tropes.
That's one apiece. Man versus Machine, I think a beautiful exploration, a really fluid piece of play that really was thought-provoking and tucked away beautifully from 30 yards. The ambiguous ending.
I like this. Is like a 40-yard header for me. The whole thing with the unicorns, symbolism of Gaff's character, who's just kind of on the sidelines, but he gives this little nudge of hints that this is in a time when kind of nuance wasn't really in filmmaking. Really, you kind of had a definitive ending either way a lot of the time. So I really like that. But then you have that with the studio ending, which is very happily ever after and very, very twee.
Yeah.
Really. But there's this little thing in the back of my mind about what you mentioned with the Weyland-Yutani stuff.
The Weyland-Tyrell? Well, two universes colliding. Two hitherto unattached universes beautifully being one being a continuation of the other. To create a bigger universe in which, well, who knows what possibilities might abound whilst Mr. Scott is still alive. The sort of thing which Marvel has had a hell of a lot of success with of late, building a huge universe in which many, many different characters can overlap, but culminates in Endgame, wasn't it? Avengers Endgame?
Yeah, very recently, which has recently surpassed Avatar, the crossover universes of Blade Runner and Alien through the Ridley Scott connection.
Yeah, all those interweaving threads. I'd go as far as to say as without Blade Runner, there'd be no Marvel universe.
And on that note, that makes this
Utropia.
Well, it was a complex one. It's probably the biggest headache we've had so far.
It's probably the most complex film we've done.
Yeah.
No dinosaurs, no surfing cops.
To the existential behemoth that is Blade Runner.
Yeah, and I mean, Rocky touches on many things, but...
I mean, it was a TKO for Rocky. It was just a straight, slugfest.
It was boxing at the end of the day, dressed up as a love story.
So, there you go. Blade Runner. Utropian, hard fought.
I was worried.
Not invested in this film.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big science fiction geek. This dystopian stuff is me.
Okay, well, we'll bear that in mind for future eps.
Well, we got there.
Yeah, we're back. Set ourselves a challenge with this one.
We did.
And I think we weathered it. So, dear listener, let us know how you did. If you know of any other obscure shared universes that you'd like to let us know about.
Let us know. Maybe this wasn't the first. It better be.
If you think that, as alluded to before, Terminator is linked to Downton Abbey in some way.
Oh, yeah. Now you mention it, I'm seeing it.
Let us know how. And also get in touch with the podcast.
Please do. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we are at Tropestormers on Twitter and Facebook.
And the Instagram.
And we're on the gram as well at Tropestormers. And if you want to get in touch with us via electronic mail, we are available at tropestormers@gmail.com.
Fantastic.
So there you go. So
if you have any ideas what you'd like us to do next, or any Storming tea breaks that we could cover.
Yeah, any tropes that you think would be good to
Storm.
We are all ears.
Yeah. So thank you for yours, and till next time,
as we say here on Tropestormers, crapping all over Star Wars and crashing planes. Bye for now.
bye.